Welcome back to Garden Studio. I'm Tessa Pinner, a gardener and designer in upstate South Carolina, Zone 8A. Today's video is all about screens and hedges, specifically privacy screening. When we moved to this property 10 years ago, there were a lot of things we didn't want to see. Multiple views of the road, traffic, neighbors that we wanted to eliminate to create the feeling of sanctuary and privacy the minute we walked outside our door. So we will begin with a walk around our property here and a discussion of a couple of specific hedge materials that we have, followed by an additional resource list. This is Clumping Bamboo, Bambusa multiplex Alphonse Carr. We in Zone 8A are at the very topmost hardiness range for clumping bamboo, but I really wanted to try it. It can go down to about 30 degrees, which is usually safe here. However, last year it got killed to the ground with the cold we had in the winter. So my learning with this one was clumping bamboo is probably not a good privacy option, but we've loved having it for the garden canes. The much larger, hardier bamboo that sometimes is recommended as a privacy screen is the running bamboo. And I would caution very strongly against planting running bamboo. If you happen to have had a run-in with running bamboo, you will know that it is very hard to contain. Sometimes the place that you need a hedge is actually a challenging location. This spot under large mature crepe myrtles is both partial shade and significant root competition. There aren't very many things that are going to be happy with that condition. However, these anise are quite tough. This is Japanese anise. You know, if you encounter anise, you can break the leaf and sniff it and it smells like licorice. So these will eventually get about 10 feet tall. You can see its size now. It is nowhere near that. It is growing very slowly because of the root competition. The shade is just right for this plant, but it will just take time for it to get robust enough to really shoot up. It's easy to think of privacy hedging as formal lines, straight rows of soldiers. And while that can be the perfect thing, it isn't always. There are formal hedges that are used in a certain kind of design approach, and then there are informal hedges when what is needed is a screen to block the view, but not necessarily a formal linear statement. The approach with a formal hedge is generally to plant all of the same thing in a row. The approach with an informal or naturalistic hedge is generally to avoid a straight line, to keep the edge just a little bit irregular, and do groupings. 3 of this, 2 of this, maybe 1 here, a different shape here. And so there's some repetition in there, but it's not a line of all the same things. So where this can come in useful is if you are trying to disguise a boundary rather than drawing your attention toward it while there's a straight line. A naturalistic hedge can make you think that there's a whole bunch of something else on the other side, or it can simply give you an interesting backdrop that stops your eye. Along this side of our property, we have 5 different kinds of trees, and that is on purpose so that it doesn't feel like that harsh straight line, but it gives you the illusion of a little bit of a naturalistic edge. This behind me is Carolina cypress. It is not recommended to plant these in mass because they can tend to get a disease and die. And if you have anything planted in a row that is prone to a disease of any kind, and the first plant gets it, guess who else is getting it? Every single other plant in that line, and you've lost your whole hedge. If you've had experience with Leland cypress, that happens a lot with Leland cypress. There was a time in the 80s that absolutely everybody planted Leyland cypress, and it's rare to see a hedge still standing today because one plant gets sick and they all go down. So this one is beautiful. I love it for the blue-green foliage, but it's an accent plant only, and he's held up by his friends. These Sanquas are our newest hedge, and this was actually to screen something inside our property. We wanted to get rid of the view of our trash cans. So this Sanqua hedge will get to about 6 foot. I wanted it to feel a little bit less formal, thus the slightly blousy shape of the Sanquas, and it forms a nice boundary along this path. There are two kinds of camellias, Chamelia Sanqua and Chamelia Japonica. These are Sanquas. They are the ones with the smaller leaf that like more sun. You can plant Chamelia Sanquas anywhere from full sun to partial shade. Now, Chamelia Japonicas, which I don't have any specifically to show you here, but they're on my reference list of shade-loving privacy options, are only for part shade to full shade. They will scorch if you put them in sun. So this location gets about 4 hours of sun. It's a perfect, ideal environment for these Chamelia Sanquas. This hedge behind me is Chindo VI Verum. It is an excellent alternative to a holly hedge, a great option when you need the line of soldiers. These will get about 12 to 15 feet tall, which is excellent right underneath our power lines. These three shrubs are fragrant tea olive, Osmanthus fragrans. They have been in the ground quite a few years and started small and got knocked back by cold for the first several years. But I have found that a fragrant osmanthus is better in a protected location. You would not want to put fragrant osmanthus down the middle of a field where it is going to get blown and be very exposed to cold winds. It's here in a corner. It is a little bit protected, and it is going to do very well here. When it blooms, it smells amazing. And it has already completely blocked the view of what is right behind us. Fortune's osmanthus, the tougher cousin to fragrant osmanthus, fragrant tea olive, is probably the #1 choice for a formal hedge in the South. It has spiny, tough leaves that are very cold tolerant, and it responds beautifully to pruning. So it can be kept either as a small hedge, 4 to 5 feet, or a much larger hedge, 10 to 12 feet, or it can be allowed to grow all on its own, au naturel, into a large evergreen tree, limbed up at the base so you see the exposed trunk, and you have floating privacy. This grouping here is Nelly Stevens holly. If I said that Fortune's osmanthus is probably the #1 formal hedge, this may be the #1 less formal hedge. Usually you don't clip hollies. We intend to just leave them and let them get as big as possible. We're trying to block several different angles behind us. Over time, this grouping will all grow together and completely block the view behind me. It's a fun option if you have a willing neighbor to partner with them if you are both working to eliminate a shared view. The 3 evergreen trees behind me are green giant arborvitae, which will get 40 feet tall or more. We partnered with the owner next door to get those planted because the view is bad for the neighbor and bad for us. These arborvitae were 6 foot tall when we planted them, so about as tall as me. They have been in the ground about 5 years. From my experience as a designer, I have spec'd and gotten to see over time quite a bit of different plant material. Things that we don't have here, but I know will work well in specific settings. The plants on this first list are favorites for sun and part sun, so at least 4 hours. And generally, the more sun these plants get, the better and the faster that they will grow. I won't go through this list one by one, but if you'd like to pause the video and take a screenshot, you could dive further and do a little more research on your own. I've chosen all of these because they are ones I use over and over, and most, if not all, should be very widely available at most nurseries and garden centers. This second list for shade and part shade favorites is much shorter, as you can see. There are a few good options, but not nearly as many as for sun and part sun. I hope that the examples here and some of the ideas that I ran you through have given you a renewed sense of what's possible in your own yard and garden. Happy gardening!